Welcome to Exceptionally Speaking, the podcast where we explore how to better understand and support exceptional learners. I'm Dr. Meryl, and each week I sit down with dedicated educators, parents, and advocates to share real strategies, inspiring stories, and moments of hope. If you're enjoying these conversations or learning something new, please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today on Exceptionally Speaking, I'm joined by Dr. Matthew Zakreski, though most people know him simply as Dr. Matt. He's the author of the Neurodiversity Playbook, a seasoned clinical psychologist, professional speaker, and co-founder of the Neurodiversity Collective, as well as the co-host of the Nerding Out on Neurodiversity podcast. With more than 500 talks delivered worldwide, Dr. Matt is known for making complex ideas about neurodivergence, think giftedness, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, twice-exceptionality, clear, relatable, and actionable for families, educators, and young people. In our conversation, we explore his own journey as a twice-exceptional student with ADHD and how that helped shape his passion for working with 2E learners. Dr. Matt also breaks down 3 main types of 2E students to help us better understand the different lived experiences of twice-exceptionality. From there, we get to dive into 3E, what it means when giftedness intersects not only with a learning difference, but also with a socially relevant identity, and why centering intersectionality is critical for equity in gifted education. Along the way, Dr. Matt shares practical insights for schools and families, clears up common misconceptions about supporting neurodivergent kids, and offers hopeful perspectives on where our systems can and must do better. I'm thrilled to share this conversation with Dr. Matt because it's equal parts real talk, research, and inspiration for anyone committed to creating more inclusive spaces for our exceptional learners. You can find more information about all our guests at hex24press.com. Please enjoy Exceptionally Speaking with Dr. Matt. Hey, Dr. Matt, it's so good to see you. Thank you for being here on Exceptionally Speaking today.
Dr. Meryl, I'm very happy to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
I am truly excited about our conversation. I have a lot that I'd love to talk to you about, but would first just love to hear a little bit more about your background and how you really landed in this gifted world specialization, specifically with twice exceptional students.
Yeah, well, I always joke that all research is me search, so I was identified gifted in 2nd grade, and at the end of my sophomore year of high school, they diagnosed me with ADHD, which explained a lot. And it's funny because everyone talked to me about the gifted thing, but this was in the 90s when gifted just meant smart, right? You're going to go to Harvard. You're going to have a bunch of patents. You're going to get a doctorate. I did the doctorate thing, but I don't think then we fully understood giftedness as a neurodivergence, right? Literally a different brain. And so when I got into my 20s and started struggling with the parts of living that neurodivergence makes harder, I thought if I ever end up in grad school, I'm going to try and focus on working with these kind of kids because I know what these struggles are like. I know what it's like to be smarter than your teacher. I know what it's like to be 14, feel 19 in some ways and feel 9 in other ways. And you and I were talking in the pre-show about making complex topics simple. That's something I think I have a gift for. So when you can talk to a family or a kid or a school and say, here's what you're seeing, here's why it's happening, and here's what you do about it, well, then I'm making people's lives easier, and that's a damn good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you started your research in psychology more specifically, you knew for sure I'm going to go down the gifted lane for this?
I was more troubled growing up by ADHD. I mean, really, where are my car keys? Why am I always running late? Paying bills, constantly forgetting my passwords to everything. And then you have to reset the password and it takes forever. But I didn't even know the word twice-exceptionality. And when I heard that term, it felt like a door opened in my brain. And I said, oh my gosh, this explains so much. Because if you could sum up neurodivergence in one little bon mot, it's easy things are hard for us and hard things are easy for us, right? I'm somebody that if I got to class, I would do great in class. If I remembered that there was a test, I would get an A on the test. It was the getting there and the remembering parts, right? And I had a sales job and I would go to work and I would make a bunch of sales, make a bunch of money, do all these really great things. And then we had a bar in our office, great job to have when you're 23. And then I'd buy a round of drinks for people. I'd have, a sandwich and I'd go home and I had left my credit card at the bar. And I would get halfway home, realize I had, and just smack myself in the forehead on the subway being how is it I'm so good at some things, but bad at being human, bad at what we now call adulting, right? And the more you learn about neurodivergence and the intersectionality of giftedness and another learning difference, that's all explained in the hard wiring. And that's why I ground all the work I do in neuroscience. Because to me, it's like in the absence of a better explanation, our brains default to the things we know. The things we know are us. So if I don't know I'm struggling with this because of my brain, I'm going to default to it must be my fault. I must be broken. I must be deficient. Everybody else got some email that I never got, so they all know what to do. And to say that to a kid or a family is really, it's a powerful moment because you're saying like, hey, this isn't just you.
And so now, super fast forward, you have the Neurodiversity Collective. You've started a podcast recently, Nerding Out on Neurodiversity, and then you have a book, the Neurodiversity Playbook. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about what's the purpose of the collective itself and what can people expect when listening to your podcast?
Well, my podcast sounds a lot like your podcast. It's conversations between people who live this life. And some of them are doctoral level experts. We just had Scott Barry Kaufman on. I can't believe we had him. He's like the closest thing our field has to a capital C celebrity. He was on Oprah.
Sure.
Like he's a big
That's
deal,
so cool. Yeah.
right? But we also interview people who are like, yeah, I was gifted in high school and I bounced around jobs for a while. College didn't really work for me. Now I'm a dental assistant, right?
Hmm.
And the message we're trying to send is that you're gifted in everything you do, but gifted doesn't mean better. It just means it's a way you experience the world. So like our dental assistant guest, she's not the best dental assistant in all the land. They didn't decide to give her a doctorate in dentistry because she's so good at being a dental assistant. She's pretty good at what she does, but she experiences the sensory aspects of giftedness, the emotional intensity, the intellectual curiosity, right? The dentist has to be like, you cannot ask me questions while I'm doing a procedure. I need to focus. I have a drill in somebody's mouth, right? So it's that sort of thing, like moving away from this gifted as egghead, genius, earth changer. Certainly there are some of us out there, and God bless them. That's great. But there's a lot of neurodivergent people, especially 2E people, walk around the world who are baristas and Uber drivers and construction workers. And I want to honor their journeys and talk about those lives because giftedness, as the old model used to be the eminence model. All gifted people should grow up to be eminent in what they do. That's bullshit. There's only so much room at the top. And not all of us can be doctors or dentists or lawyers or particle physicists. There have to be 2E bartenders and math teachers and the guy who scrubs your sidewalk. The more we move away from this idea that your brain is a ticket to something better, the more we allow the humanity of different people and honoring the different situations they come from to shine through. Because you bring your gifted or 2E brain with you wherever you go, but if that's a burden around your neck, you're just going to feel shitty for the rest of your life. And I don't want that for anybody. We didn't choose the brains we got. Some of us have found our ways into environments that honored that, celebrated that, amplified it, and that's great. Some people don't. And it's unfortunately, it's largely our Black and brown kids. It's kids from rural and impoverished areas across the racial and ethnic spectrum, right? I always try and talk about this. Is like for anybody out there who's always felt different, those differences are not just in your head. Ironically, they're in your brain. So let's talk about that because, I always say my job isn't to make people's lives easy, but my job is to help them make their lives easier. And
Hmm.
I can always make somebody's life easier. And that's a pretty powerful thing.
And so in the Neurodiversity Collective, is that a more specialization for adult support or kid support or both?
So I started the collective knowing that I couldn't do all the work myself. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. That means I can do therapy and testing. But the more this work I do, the more advocacy I do, the more going to meetings, talking to superintendents. So I realized like I always wanted to have a team of people because mental health is so much more than therapy. It's speech language pathology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, play therapy, music therapy. It's good diet. It's good exercise. I want kids to be doing yoga. I want kids to learn life skills. So I was like, let me call it the collective because that opens the door for me to hire anybody who I think can help kids. And it's funny because I tend to use the word kids as a shorthand. And primarily my practice started as kids. But then I realized that neurodivergent kids tend to have neurodivergent grown-ups. And then they would ask me for help. So then we grew the practice to serve more adults. And it's become this really sort of life mission. And, it's funny. I live in northern New Jersey. And in the next town over to us, it's called Kenville. There's an old hotel. It's called the Kenville Hotel. And I have wanted to buy this thing forever because I think, like, would not a cool old independent hotel be perfect for a therapy practice? You've got
Totally. Yeah.
an area, right? You've got the lounge, you've got a full production kitchen, so I can teach cooking and life skills. We've got all the different hotel rooms. There was 18 rooms in the hotel. I've had this memorized. That means that all those different offices, like, and it's on some grounds. There's a basketball hoop, there's a little garden. I mean, to me, it's just like I could have yoga in the backyard, life skills in the kitchen. We could be doing group in the conference room. We could be doing individual therapy throughout the building. That would be ideal because I just could put it all in one real happy little neurodivergent castle. And, we're not quite there yet. I mean, if
Yeah.
I,
Is it for sale or?
it is for sale. It is
It
for
is.
sale. Yeah. The price has dropped by more than $100,000 since I've moved up here 3 years ago. It was 900 something. Now it's 790 something.
Okay.
And I'm like, yeah, all I have to do is the Powerball. And then,
No
and then
problem.
right.
Pay cash. There you go.
Speakers come in person, Dr. Meryl, and you can come hang out with us at our hotel.
I'd love to.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's speak that into existence.
Right.
So,
Yeah. That's why I keep talking about it. Right.
yes, keep saying it.
Yeah. Maybe one of your listeners happens to own that property and wants to give me a sweetheart deal. I would not say no. Uh,
Exactly. It's for a great cause.
for
Yeah.
a great cause. But like,
Yes.
really, it's just, I think leading with the word neurodiversity is like, we get you, or we are much more likely to get you than your average therapist, your average teacher, your average educational coach. Let us meet you where you are and speak the same language. And we've done our best to make our practice as neurodivergent affirming as possible, from our intake process to how we schedule therapy to how we pay for therapy. We really do try and streamline it because the world is built by neurotypicals for neurotypicals. So let's carve out a space and pathway that makes more sense for our people.
I love that. That's great. So I'm thinking about just twice exceptionality on a whole. In some other episodes, we've had some discussions around really the definition. And we know essentially when you have two identifications, right? We have this gifted identification and a special education identification, but it's a disorder or a learning disability. Although sometimes doesn't come with a 504 or an IEP. Sometimes it's not formally identified, and that is still a twice exceptional student. But I'm just wondering, how do you explain twice exceptionality in the simplest terms to someone who's maybe new to that?
So I always like to say that there are three types of twice exceptionality because, like, the formal definition, right, is you're gifted IQ and you have some other learning difference, right? Anything from dysgraphia, dyslexia, dyscalculia to autism to OCD. It's a very wide range. But I think the three experiences of twice exceptionality are what's matter. So there's type A, where it's like you have a kid whose gifts outweigh their weaknesses. So I'm a good example of this, right? I was gifted and people ignored that my backpack and my locker were a mess. They ignored that I was always late to things. And if you forget that there's a test, but you study for it in 3 minutes in the passing time and you get a 94, nobody ever wonders how you got a 94.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're like, oh, you got a 94. Right. And then to tweak an old line, like, why do we procrastinate? Because we keep getting away with it. How did I not get diagnosed with ADHD? Because I kept getting away with it.
Right.
You meddling kids, and that was my experience. So then in high school, when the work got harder than I was smart, then I didn't have the internal executive functioning infrastructure to make that work. And I fell hard and I fell fast. So that's the type A twice exceptional experience. The type B is the kids whose weaknesses outweigh their strengths. Early in my career, I worked with a young woman who had diagnoses of dysgraphia and dyslexia. She was seeing me for sort of general anxiety, depression, some acting out. And the more I talked to her, I was like, gosh, this is a sharp kid, right? But we are such a verbal society, especially in the Western world, especially in the United States. And her verbal expression was great, but her written expression was poor. Oh, at one point I was like, did we ever do an IQ test with you? She's like, no, they diagnosed me with dyslexia, and then I couldn't write my name, so they diagnosed me with dysgraphia. So I was okay. So we did a whole educational evaluation. Her verbal IQ was 147.
Hey, yeah.
Like, she got words, right? She could use them well, but in an academic environment, her strengths were overwhelmed by her weaknesses. So that was one of the best feedback sessions I've ever done, because explaining that to the school is like, okay, I know it looks like this, and I'm not saying she's not dyslexic and dysgraphic. However, look at these numbers, look what this means. So if we can give this kid voice to text software, and if we can let her speak her words into like a dragon or some sort of situation like that, look how high she can fly. And we had done like a test drive. Like she had, this sort of novel that was bouncing around in her head. But she's like, no, I can't write it because I'm dyslexic and I'm dysgraphic and no one will ever do that for me. Well, give her voice to text software. She's given me permission to say her name. I don't do it because confidentiality is the most important part of our jobs, but she just published her third novel.
Okay.
So
Amazing. Yeah.
this is a kid who grew up and is living that 2E life because we found ways to honor the gifts that were sort of hidden by the weaknesses. And then type C, which is named, very much on purpose as well. So when I go to schools and I talk to people, it's like the gifted kids are easy to see because they do XYZ, they act like gifted kids. The 2E kids are not so easy to see. So let me ask you this, faculty. Are there any kids in this building that piss you off? And they always laugh and they're like, yes, oh my God, Bobby or Susie or Johan or whoever. And it's often like the humanities teacher's like, this kid sucks. And the STEM teacher's like, no, he's the best kid on the planet, right? Because when you have a spiky profile, as 2E profiles tend to be, you have hyper strengths in some areas and hyper weaknesses in others. And those tend to fall along academic lines. Sometimes it's the art teacher and the music teacher like, this kid is God's gift to education. All the regular teachers are like, are you kidding me? I pray for the days she's out sick. And because when your brain doesn't lock into a thing that you're being asked to do, neurotypical people usually can sort of grin and bear it. They can get through it. They can grind. Neurodivergent people are like, that door doesn't fit me. I will not squeeze to get in it. In fact, I will stand in this hallway. I will sit my ass down and say, I will not go in that door. And so when you don't do the work, they can't see how well you work or how smart you are or where your weaknesses are to support you. So you end up getting a bunch of zeros. You get a reputation as a bad kid. And we call this last type of personality type C because in the academic environment, often what it looks like is a kid who doesn't turn in their homework and doesn't participate in class. But because they're so smart, they get A's on all their tests and papers. Now, I'm not a math guy, but if you get 100 on a whole bunch of things and zeros on a whole bunch of things, Dr. Meryl, what do you think your grade ends up being?
Yeah, probably 50.
Yeah.
Depends on how many you have, but not good. Failing. Yeah.
So what we found is because tests and papers tend to be weighed more, they tend to not get a 50, they tend to get a 70.
Okay. Okay.
It's called the gifted C. It's an interesting thing, right? It's one of those phenomena that once you know about it and you start looking for it, like, oh my God, it's everywhere, right? I can't tell you how many C student gifted kids and 2E kids are out there because if it was just show me what you know, they would get straight A's. But because education is not built to show what you know, it's to show how well you can listen, how compliant you can be, right? You got a lot of kids who don't and can't play the game and they end up getting lower grades and then they get sort of shunted into lower classes, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes a vicious cycle. So that's why I always ask that question. Are there any kids here who piss you off? Right? Because 9 times out of 10, those are my kids.
Absolutely. It reminds me of an initiative that we've been doing. It's really a twice exceptional initiative where we are targeting students for additional cognitive testing who have a bunch of flags on their record for behavior issues. And that's it. We're just looking at students with high behavior concerns and asking their parents for permission to give an additional cognitive assessment. And we're looking at like 20% of those kids coming back in the gifted range. And so it's another way to approach exactly what you're saying on like, this is not how typical gifted students show up. And by typical, we mean culturally normative gifted students, right? And yet they are still there. And we need to be figuring out how to serve them in public school as well. So thank you for that explanation too on the A, B, and C. That's a great way to put it. I'm wondering, for your perspective, what are some common misunderstandings in our approaches to supporting twice exceptional students? Is there anything that comes to mind in that realm?
I mean, how long do we have, right?
Yeah.
One thing is to just sort of to piggyback off what you just said is take the idea you have in your head of a gifted kid and throw it in the garbage, right? I say this because I come from a place of immense privilege. I am a cisgender heterosexual white male from the suburbs who has a doctorate. I mean,
Right.
nobody is more privileged than me. But as an adorable little precocious white boy from the burbs who walked into my second grade classroom and was smarter than my teacher, I got honored and seen and elevated for that. Imagine what that looks like for a kid in a inner city school environment or a kid who's one of the few kids of color in their district. Those behaviors are not always seen positively, especially when they're great in some things and poor in others, or their goodness is inconsistent. So we have to throw our ideas out. And like, I love the idea of testing the behavioral kids. We know By some metrics, over 50% of the prison population is neurodivergent.
Yeah.
Right. So we know that a lot of people whose brains just don't sink into the environments they were put in tend to fall into that vicious cycle we talked about here. They do poorly, so they're treated poorly, so they feel poorly, so they do poorly, so they do poorly because they're treated poorly. And then down and down and down and down until they wash out of school, end up in prison, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like, let's catch those kids. I always tell parents, it's like, imagine you as an adult were trying to wear your kids' shoes, right? They're shoes, and these are the shoes we have, but they're not the right shoes for you. Don't you think wearing the shoes that don't fit you would impact your mood and behavior? And it's funny because we see this in sports and we see this in arts a lot. Like, basketball players like, I didn't like that coach, but this coach gets me and lets me play the basketball the way I'm supposed to. And they do better. Or like an actor who's like, I need to be pushed. I can be a bit of a diva. I need a director who gets that and will work with me. Like the single biggest variable that we don't pay attention to as mental health and child focused professionals is the power of the environment and its
Mm-hmm.
goodness of fit. Right. And so, like, to take one more example, so people ask me all the time, why are ADHD diagnoses skyrocketing right now? And there's lots of reasons: increased awareness, better testing, COVID, lots of shit. Right. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I think one of the biggest ones is that in the last 20 years, recess time in the United States has decreased 71%.
And that's just what we know.
And that's
And
just what
people
we know,
continue to
right?
take recess away every single day.
Right.
So that's just on paper. Yeah.
Especially for our 2E kids, right? You
Yep.
kid who's fidgety and needs to move his body, you can't go outside for recess today. It's like, dude, are you just going to set yourself on fire? Like, that's
Right.
the worst.
Worst idea. Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, to all the adults out there who are in positions of power, kids can't have to earn their supports, because on the days they need them the most are the days they won't earn them. Recess should never be taken away as a punishment. Now, we can make them do recess differently. If everybody else goes out and plays on the playground, this kid can stay in the gym. There are times where I get that, but goodness sakes, like, please, let's be human. But so being human, right? I was in a school 2 years ago doing an observation, and we had a first grader and a little kid, right? This school's so small enough that the K's and the ones are in the room together. And the teacher is hollering at this little girl, put your feet on the ground. Good students sit with their feet on the ground. So she put her feet together, like, good students sit with their back to the back of the chair. This girl was not tall enough to do both of those things at the same time. Either her back was against the chair or feet, and then her tiptoes were on the ground, or her feet were flat on the ground and then she was leaning forward in the chair. And the teacher, for some reason, decided to make this her God's mission to, like, make this a thing. And I
That was
never
her hill. Okay.
I pulled her aside. I was like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, this kid cannot physically comply with the thing you're asking them to do. And because I'm me, I started looking into it. So there's significantly more academic instruction in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade than there used to be. And it's hard to get exact numbers on which, but it's a lot more. And so kids are doing more seat work. They're being challenged more. They're flexing their brains more. They're getting less physical release time. They're getting less brain breaks, less move their body. So when a kid needs to move their body and can't and acts out in the classroom, Dr. Merrill, what diagnosis do those kids get?
Right. Special education.
Right. Special ed
Yes.
and like behavioral disturbance,
Yep.
emotionally disturbed, other health impairment, like our good friend from school psych. And a lot of those kids get ADHD diagnoses because it is damn easy to get an ADHD diagnosis if you're already labeled as a bad kid.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But like, little kids need to move their bodies. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. If they're not watching TV, they are wiggly as hell, right? So at
Right.
dinner table, they're like, Dad, 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 look at this, Dad, Dad. And they're like flipping over the chairs and crawling under the table. And I'm like, where was this energy when I asked you guys to go on a walk 3 hours ago? But that's fine. That's fine. Like, that's the thing is, if you watch my kids at the dinner table, you'd think they both have ADHD, and they might, right? Genetics being what they are,
Sure.
right? But it's one of those things, like, we're asking kids to do something their brains and bodies aren't ready to do. And by doing that, we are putting them in that shoe that doesn't fit, and they're acting out. And it is very easy in overstressed systems to just label that kid as ADHD, give them some meds, stick them in special ed, and that becomes their story. And how dare we? We like, oh, I'm so busy, I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, listen, we live in a society where they're building $200 million high school football stadiums in Georgia. And somebody retweeted that, like, hey, what does your library look like? I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, how dare we, right? Like, we have gotten so out of whack with how we allocate our resources that there aren't enough school psychs because there aren't enough school counselors. So you slap a diagnosis on a kid, you put him in a system that you think can help them. I've never met a school psych who doesn't want to do well by a kid. But if you've got 45 kids you've got to see every week, you don't have time to do a proper diagnosis, right? And that's why I partner with so many districts here in New Jersey. Let me take some of those cases, the spiky cases, the complicated cases. Now districts will call me and they say, like, can you see this kid? And it's an honor for me because I do believe in public school. Actually on my on my podcast recently, I was like, oh, the three best things our country does are public schools, national parks, and libraries, right? And our guest was like, yeah, that's great. And then Jake, my co-host, goes, and trash pickup. What? He's like, well, trash pickup. Trash pickup is very good. It's an important thing. I'm like, sure, Jake. And trash pickup. Are you happy now? Like people are like, well, you advocate for kids to find these different schools. You must hate public school. I actually don't. It's the opposite. If I can make a public school fit this kid, I'm going to do that every time. That's always my first choice. But if I can't, and there's some of these kids who just can't in public school, it's nobody's fault. It's the reality of the situation. Then I'm going to fight for them to be in the school that fits them. Like, people often describe me as aggressively pragmatic. That's where that shows up.
I think that's a good compliment, though. Aggressively pragmatic. Yeah.
Wouldn't take it any other way, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting that when you're talking about, just the expectations of kinder, first and second grade being a lot more than they used to be. A long time ago, I was a ECE teacher and a paraprofessional kind of at the same time. And when I started to become a kindergarten paraprofessional, I walked around telling everyone, did you know kindergarten is the new first grade? Like, I just didn't know until I was there watching it and teaching kids, like, okay, this is way, way different than what people assume is happening in kindergarten. And that was, 15 or so years ago. And so it's even different now. So
the rise of private preschools has pushed so much academic content early. And like in many ways, that's a good thing. My kids both went to private preschool, right? Sure, they came into kindergarten ready to roll. But you're right. Because of that, it's pushed all of that up. And now kindergarten's first grade, and first grade is second grade, and second grade is third grade. And then you get to middle school, and it's like, well, what does middle school even mean anymore? Because you got kids taking APs in eighth grade now.
absolutely.
What?
Ready or not, they are there. Yeah. So I'm wondering, and this is a question that I love to ask people who are, especially like yourself, who have conversations with district leaders. I love to ask, really, where do you see the leverage point? I mean, we want to increase more inclusive spaces for our twice exceptional and just gifted students in general. And I have a lot of frustration. I've kind of like walked every step of the ladder up to the director position that I'm in now and looking around being like, okay, I really get the system that I'm in now, and I see the limitations and how much we can or cannot do without, me trying to convince 50 other people to agree with me. And so where do you think the leverage point is in our really systems approach, our giant school district approach to our support for gifted and TUI students?
So the analogy I usually use for this, I lived in Boston for many years. A lot of people were like from Boston. They're actually from like New Hampshire. It's like, dude, just say you're from New
Sure.
Hampshire. Right. What's the best pizza place in Denver? Let's just say it's Giuseppe's. We can probably imagine that the best pizza in Denver is probably not as good as the best pizza in New York City, right? Or certainly Rome, right? So what I could do if I wanted to make Giuseppe's the best pizza place in the world, I could fly out the best chefs. I could build you a new pizza oven, get you the best ingredients, build you a garden so you have like your own hydroponic tomatoes and all this other crap, right? But it's at some point, isn't it easier and smarter and more fiscally responsible to just fly to New York and eat pizza there, or fly to Rome and eat pizza there? And, of course, the analogy doesn't hold water in New Jersey because people are like, no, there's a great pie in my town. We'll just go to right. I get that. But like then substitute that for Tex-Mex, right? Like, oh
yeah, exactly.
So like, so that's the thing. It's just like, what schools do is they tie themselves into knots trying to solve a situation, right? Like I worked with a client early in his life who could only see his significant other 2 days a month. And one day, because of the way the work schedule worked, it was from 3 in the afternoon to 11 p.m. And the other day was from 7 a.m. till noon. Those were the only 2 days he could see her every month. And he's like, I'm happy. I was like, bullshit. Like, you're not. Like, no one is happy. Like, you cannot have dinner. You cannot have meaningful dates. You cannot have enough
Yeah.
in like what is like the 12 hours a month you get with this person? He's like, well, every 6 months she gets 3 weeks furlough. I'm like, that's fabulous. Good for you. How many of those 3 weeks can you see her? He's like, it's like some of it. I'm like, listen, like, I'm not saying she's not great. And I'm not saying that there are parts of this relationship that work, but that's not sustainable. And really the question we have to ask ourselves, because education, like mental health, is playing the long game. What is best for this situation, for this kiddo long term? Because the problem is like, well, this teacher is great. And we have a really good soccer coach this year. Cool. What happens next year? What happens
Hmm.
when that teacher goes on maternity leave? Like, people cannot be the answer. Systems have to be the answer. And the way that we have to leverage those systems is when we've officially bent ourselves all the way over backwards, it's time to think about somewhere else, right? So in Denver, you guys have got Stargate Academy, right? It's right down the road from you guys. Was it Thornton?
Actually, I was just on the board for 3 years, just
Awesome.
finish my term. Yeah.
Robin is a dear friend. She's lovely.
Yes. She's a dear friend as well.
Actually, it's funny. She took me to a barbecue place when I was out there, and I was like, oh, she's like, it's not good. I was like, it's good for Denver,
It's not good.
right? I lived in North Carolina for 5 years. I'm like, no, I know good barbecue. It's good for Denver, right? Like if I get a Philly cheesesteak out in Cincinnati, I don't think it's as good as Philly, but it can be good for Cincinnati, right? And that's the thing. It's just like we are always trying to do better. Like, so, let's do what we can with the tools we have at our disposal. And if we reach a limit to that, if we hit that glass ceiling, it is nobody's fault. It is not a failure of the system if we cannot meet this kid's needs. And, like if you have a kid with medical issues, as many neurodivergent people do, it's like, listen, would you send your kid to your GP or would you find a specialty doc? They're harder to find. They're more expensive. They're harder to get into. I get it. But, I'm in the process of overcoming Lyme disease. Like, my GP could only help me so much. I made an appointment with a specialist. And he's like, all right, your treatment protocol is all screwed up. You got to do these things instead. I was like, and now I'm getting better faster. It doesn't mean my GP, my general practitioner, is not a good doctor. She's great. But there's somebody out there who knows more about this and can do it better because they have specifically gotten the training to do so. Right. So schools get like, well, no, like you're saying I'm bad at my job. I'm not. I couldn't do your job. But what I'm saying is that at some point we have to say we've gone as far as we can with this kid. And to do right by everybody involved, right, we have to move things. My wife is a psychologist as well, and she works in the addiction field.
Okay.
And the term for a lot of the addicted people in the medical system are called super utilizers. They're in emergency rooms a lot. They're in detox programs a lot. They're in rehabs a lot. They're in jails a lot. They utilize a lot of the system. So the system is spending 80% of its energy on 2% of the people because they're super utilizers. But it
Yeah.
means something like you or I go to the hospital because like we broke our ankle and like, oh, I can't see you because I've got 3 people who have OD'd and 2 people who need Narcan. And then it makes general population dislike those people. It's like, oh, it's like, because how many 2E kids take up all the school's bandwidth or 19 meetings a week about Jimmy because Jimmy's autistic and ADHD, but has an IQ of 165?
Yep. Yep.
Like, there need to be specialty programs for the people who are super utilizers, right? Because then we're putting that bandwidth in a place where it can be handled, which frees up more bandwidth for general everyday bullshit, right? I'm sure that Denver Public Schools, broadly speaking, has more problems than we can shake a stick at. So let's put the kids who are going to be super utilizers in a program that can handle their super utilization. And sometimes it takes an outsider to say that. So it's like, hey, guys, you're doing great. I'm not your enemy. I'm your friend. And you guys deserve a freaking parade. I'll buy you guys all a round of margaritas. However, it's time to have a different conversation about this kid.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point, and you'll be happy to know we are expanding our gifted magnet sites in Denver Public Schools. We've had 7, and this is the first year ever that we created last year a process for schools to actually apply to expand to magnet programming. So we're adding 4 additional magnet sites that are in year 0 this year. So huge. A lot of work to help support those schools in really getting there and feeling solid in their programming, but it's because of what you're saying right now, which is we need to have really solid programs for the students that need them. And not every gifted and TUI student needs to be in a magnet program. And we need to have them available, and we need to have different models available. Two of our new magnet sites have essentially dual language programs within them because we don't want our Spanish-speaking gifted and 2E students to have to pick dual language or gifted magnet, right? We want it to be both. So there's a lot of promise and a lot of hope there too. And we see in our current magnet sites a higher concentration of high needs 2E students, as you would expect. And one of the impetus of me even starting this podcast is a lot of the questions I get from school leaders on like, how do I do this? Right? How do I do this? Like they're here now. And I think it's a combination of a couple of things you're saying is environment matters a lot. Your school environment matters a lot. And yes, the people support having a wide range of specialties, but having that built into the system and not having it being dependent upon this wonderful psychologist that's at this one magnet site. It's like, how are we ensuring that all of our psychologists at magnet sites are getting the training that they need in a systematic approach that makes it sustainable? And it's not just that one person leaves, that program is not as good. So anything else you would add to that, to our magnet site leaders on how they can increase and just improve their 2E support at their schools?
I'm so happy it exists. So, well, why don't I say this? There are a few things I love more than coming to Colorado for work. So why don't we just set up that I just come out there? Right.
That sounds like a great
Right?
idea.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's just like, let's just do it in person. Cause like a lot of the social emotional learning stuff that I do, because we know neurodivergent people develop asynchronously. They tend to be faster developed in academic and intellectual skills and social and emotional. I would happily come out, and we've got a lot of these games that can be done in Spanish and I'm like 2/3 of the way translating into Mandarin. Translating into Mandarin
Okay.
is really hard. I'm not very good at it, but I have
I can imagine.
people for that. I worked really closely with the Milwaukee Public Schools when they had a Javits grant a couple of years ago. And so much of what we did was adapting SEL stuff for Spanish. They had big Spanish speaking population. And, I mean, I took French in school. Like theoretically, I'm useless at this, but gamification of SEL can be done in any language. So we started really working. We dove into it, and it helped that Herman and Marceli, they're Spanish speaking, so they helped me a lot with that. But it was this amazing intersection of teachers and administrators and professionals who give a shit about these kids and don't discount a kid because they don't speak English or they're in a wheelchair or they're from the poor part of town. Gifted kids are everywhere. And I remember giving a talk to Philadelphia public schools when I lived in Philly for grad school. And I was like, by the numbers, right? Let's just say you have 200,000 kids you serve. So if we know gifted is somewhere between the top 2 and 5% of the population, right? Accounting for those 2E kids. Let's say you guys should be serving 20,000 twice exceptional kids. You guys are serving 11,000 gifted kids. Where do you think those 9,000 kids are missing from? I guarantee you it's from Strawberry Hill and Northeast Philly and the rough parts of town. And the kids you're missing are the Black and brown kids who may not get to school as often, who got childcare needs, right? And I was like, it's not your fault. I'm not saying like, how dare you solve societal rot? Instead, it's like, we have to cast a wider net so we catch more kids and we put them in the right systems, because maybe a kid who can only get to school a couple of times a week, well, if they're in the gifted magnet school, they're going to get better instruction for them and learn more as a result. The hit they take for not getting to school as often is less. Listen, public schools can't save the world, but they can sure as hell help,
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. It's exciting to talk about really how our magnet sites can help support. And it's a work in progress, right? Because those magnet sites, it's a different student and family community at each magnet site. And so the programming is not going to be identical across them. So approaches have to be different. So it's been fun to work with different school leaders on what that looks like. So I'm wondering if we could nerd out a little bit on this topic of 3E. This is something that I don't think is talked about enough in our gifted world, but I think it's bubbling up a little bit more. But I think still some people are unaware that it's even a term. And so back to our goal of simplifying complex topics, do you have an explanation that you give people around, well, what is 3E? We got 2E now. What does 3E really mean?
So 3E, and we have to, this is Christina Collins in her work, Donna Ford, far be it from me to stand on the shoulders of incredibly powerful, intelligent, awesome Black women professionals and be like, I'm not going to name check them. Donna,
Right. Say the
Christina, we
names.
love
Yeah.
you. We can say their names.
Yes.
Absolutely. Right. So 3E is a term that if you have gifted is an exceptionality, learning differences is exceptionality. The third exceptionality is any socially relevant identity. So that can be impoverished. That can be being Black or brown. That can be English as a second language. That can be LGBTQ. And specifically the term for gifted kids or neurodivergent kids who were LGBTQ used to be twice other. And
Hmm.
that's like the worst phrase of all
Yeah.
time. I was like, oh God, no. So when Doctors Collins and Ford and their teams put the term 3E together, a lot of us in the LGBTQ space were like, put our kids there too. Put our kids there too, right?
Yep.
And so if you have one, you may just have the one. You may have many. I mean, I serve many kids who are twice exceptional and are African American and gay, right? But there's
Mm-hmm.
no 4E. It's not like a cell phone. There's not Wi-Fi. It's just with 3E, but any socially relevant thing because it allows us to intentionally lead with intersectionality. So if you have a kid, and we know that somewhere between 38 and 70% of neurodivergent kids identify as LGBTQ.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge spread. So what I usually tell people is think 1 in 2. For every other neurodivergent kid you meet, assume that they're somewhere on the LGBTQ spectrum. And that can be anything from like bisexual to gender nonconforming to broadly queer, right? We're going to figure it out. And there's very little brain research on this, but there's some promising stuff saying that. So your parietal frontal integration area, where your parietal lobe on top of your head and your frontal lobe meet, it's right around where your hairline would be. That's where intelligence comes from. It's also where personality comes from. And there's some evidence to suggest that when that part of the brain comes online a lot earlier, as it does in most gifted kids, it tends to bring personality online earlier too. And there's some evidence that suggests that that the earlier the personality comes online, the more open it becomes. The more open it becomes may lead to more gender expansive and sexuality expansive persona. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
it's really, really hard to study this stuff, right? But it's an interesting place where the research, the neuroscience is pointing us. So yes, basically you could say every other neurodivergent kid has some LGBTQ identity. They may not know it yet. They may never share it with you, but it's a good thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And I'll just say anecdotally that the way that we were reporting genders in Denver public schools, we had a couple years where we had a variety of options, and then a year where they really narrowed it down to just binary male, female, or something else, right? And when we looked at the data and disaggregated for our gifted students, it was sitting right at 40% of students who were willing to report. That doesn't mean everyone, right? It's just
Right.
those who are willing to report and check something else off. So yeah, and that really illuminated something for us in our department on, okay, are we providing adequate support? How do we provide training and inclusivity training to our GT teachers? And like you're saying, just spreading awareness. So I'm wondering about 3E in the sense that, and I like how you talked about how we're not then saying 4E, 5E, if there's multiple exceptionalities after that. But do you see 3E as always centering around giftedness first?
I think that 3E's got to center around what matters most to the kid. And there's one kid I see, I've been seeing them, I'm going to use they, them pronouns intentionally for many years now. I forget they're trans, not because I'm like transphobic or a bad therapist, but because that's not what we work on. We work on their academic skills. We work on managing depression. And every so often I'm like, right. I forgot about that piece. It's a front of mind because we're thinking about college, and college obviously like, what dorm am I going to live in?
Yeah.
But their ADHD is driving the show right now because it's getting in the way of them doing their academics. So right now that E is driving the bus. But when we're in the community, the transgender E is driving the bus. But usually in our conversations, it's the gifted E that's driving the bus, right? So, different environments will pull for different aspects of that kid. And my number one piece of advice that I give to adults who work with 3E kids is don't lose the kid for the identity.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a kid who's gay, or a kid who's from the wrong side of the tracks, or the kid who is in a wheelchair, any socially valent identity. They have likes and dislikes and good days and bad days and strengths and weaknesses and dreams and nightmares and foibles and all that other stuff. But if you're like, well, I can't give them feedback because they're in a wheelchair or they're gay, or it's like, that's not our job as adults, is to give those kids a pass. Our job as adults is to layer that feedback through the lenses of that intersectionality. I'm going to be real different with a kid whose family I know doesn't have two nickels to rub together than with a kid who has access to everything.
Hmm.
My feedback looks different, but either way, it comes from a place of love and it comes from a place of, I want you to do better. But that's the charge I would put to all of us, is that it's not leading with one of the relevant E's. It's leading with the lens of intersectionality, because different things are going to matter a lot more at different times as that kid grows and changes.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. One of the things that was kind of blowing my mind when I was digging more into just the concept of 3E is I found this article on the Saying website from Dr. Christina Collins, and she has 3 Venn diagrams showing, like, okay, learning disability and then cultural difference, however you want to categorize 3E. But having those two alone without gifted is considered twice exceptional. And that was kind of blowing my mind, because I was like, wait, I never thought about it like that. And no one really defines twice exceptionality without gifted or without a SPED label. And so if we continue to use 3E, it sounds like we need to broaden our terminology or use of 2E. And just wanted to get your thoughts on that and how we could interpret that better.
Somebody jokingly, we were sitting on a panel at a conference, we were talking about this, and somebody jokingly was like, oh, maybe we should bring back twice other. And we're all like, boo, right? No, I mean, 2E is the best word we have right now for 2 of those 3 sides of the Venn diagram. I honor that. I'm with that. I think that we need to come up with terms that are a little bit more specific, a little bit more targeted.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I think they've not done good enough, because I just think we can do better, right? And I never want to give a term to a kid that I need to explain to somebody else. Like, oh, it could mean this. Like, no, like,
Yeah.
I hate having to explain to schools that, like, ADHD hyperactive type or ADHD inattentive type. I wish there was a different word for it. Because so many people think ADHD, the kid just running around the classroom throwing pencils at people, rather than the kid who's sitting there quietly daydreaming. You don't see that kid. Like, how could that kid be ADHD? It's like, well, because it's more than what you think it is. So I don't have the answer. I would not pretend to do so, but I have said this to my colleagues, like, I think we need to come up with a term that works better, but I will absolutely use 2E in that way until we do. Like a lot of my, LGBTQ kids, I was like, listen, we're gonna use the word queer. It's sort of a catch-all term until we find the words that make better sense for you. We may never do that. We may figure it out tomorrow. One of my kids, he's like, I'm aro ace, so aromantic, asexual, but honestly, I don't really know. So let's just go with queer. And I'm like, that's
Yeah.
everybody, right? And that's an okay thing. That's like, none of these things were handed down from on high. A chair is not a chair because we call it a chair, right? That's just a word
Yes.
slapped on it. So like, language evolves, let's evolve with it. And I think that's that's a good thing for all of us to remember.
I've been thinking a lot about whether or not it is helpful to bring into district conversations with that language, right? I can disaggregate data and show disproportionalities for our Black students who are underrepresented. And then should I start using language more around a third exceptionality? Is that going to be more confusing? So those are just some of the things I think about. And I think it's good that we all continue to talk about it, like you're saying, until or unless we get to a better way to describe it. But ultimately, we do need to be continuing to center support on marginalized groups of students. And so if that's a way to do it, then I think it's still a positive way to do it. So
Yeah, the
makes
ends
total sense.
justify the means in that case, I would and I rarely feel that about education.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. I have one final question that I ask all of my wonderful guests, which is really, what's bringing you hope right now as it relates to neurodivergence in our society and our support of students, of adults? Would love to just hear some hope from you.
It feels like it's in short supply these days, right?
That's a selfish reason why I end every podcast with it.
The thing that gives me hope is, so like, I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, where not caring about things was cool, right? Like that affective disinterest, like, whatever, man. Like, this generation, Gen Alpha, they give a shit. They are informed, they are plugged in, they will not go quietly into that good night. And I love that about them. Like in the way that I feel like a lot of our generation is sort of screwed the pooch. And certainly we were let down by the generation above us. Like these generations coming up are like, excuse me, if you're not on the front lines, then we will. And I'm like, I love that for you. And I'm going to be there with you because you're not much of an ally if you're not getting hit by the same stones that your people you're protecting are getting hit by. But that gives me hope because it's just, it feels more intentional and personological in this generation. They care and they're unafraid to care. And like the children shall lead us. And I'm okay with that.
Agreed. Agreed. Very well stated. Well, thank you, Dr. Matt, for joining me today. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that we can get together again soon.
I would love that. So let's make it happen either in Denver or virtually,
Yes,
but it'll be a fun chat indeed.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of Exceptionally Speaking is brought to you by Hex 24 Press, where education meets imagination. I founded Hex 24 Press in 2024 to uplift educator voices and provide a publishing home for myself and other educators to bring our work into the world. You can find more information about today's guests, including links to their resources and services, at hex24press.com. Thank you for supporting educators, independent creators, and small business. We're so glad you're here.